Welcome to Autism Tips and Tools, where we highlight the best practical guidance from previous episodes of Autism Knows No Borders. Whether you're a self-advocate, a family member, or a service provider, there's something here for you. I'm Rachel Harmon, a professional in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy, and the following clip is from my conversation with Chris McDonald, an educator, designer, and social entrepreneur from Sydney, Australia. Chris is the founder and CEO of PicSeePal, a light tech communication tool for all ages, abilities, and settings. Here's Chris talking about how PicSeePal is giving a voice to people with limited access to high-tech devices.
PicSeePal is a plastic folder with 3 pages that are double-sided, and it's about the size of an iPad. And it can be worn like a bag over your shoulder, so the child or the individual using it can walk around with it, and it's their communication system. It's not a laminated piece of paper up on a wall in a classroom or a therapy room. It belongs to them. It's their communication system. And that's a very important point to digest, that the communication system belongs to them the same way your words belong to you. I'm not in control of your words. I don't get to hold your words. You get to hold your words and speak your words. And so having a communication system that belongs to that person is a very, very important thing. And that had never been done before. There's pod books, but pod books are this thick. Pod books are great. Pod books are fantastic. But for someone to create a pod book is a lot of work, and there's a lot of laminating and there's a lot of complexities around that. Mm-hmm. Pod books are great. This is not a judgment on pod books. But there needed to be a system that was easier to implement and easier to put together and easier to use. So PicSeePal, they're double-sided pages, and basically you can pop out each page and it peels apart kind of like 2 takeaway container lids. And they peel apart and you can put inside them any type of paper. You could put in the back of a cereal box that was cut out and you were drawing on the back of it. And you could put it in, you close them up and it seals. It's pretty much watertight. And then those plastic sleeves snap back into the 3 pages. So you end up with 6 pages of whatever you want. Now, the way it's being used is it's being used in a multitude of ways. A lot of people are taking screenshots from their AAC apps that they're using.
Oh, okay.
And putting them into the PicSeePal. A lot of educational people are using, like they're designing lessons around like volcanoes or, going to the beach or whatever. And the children can interact with them using a whiteboard marker. You can draw a whiteboard marker on it. So it's not electronic. There's no batteries in it. It's just made of plastic. So it's a housing. It's a housing for visual supports. And that really doesn't sound so groundbreaking, but what is groundbreaking about it is all of a sudden children who don't have access to high tech or do have access to high tech, but not in all situations, now all of a sudden do have access to their words. That is what's groundbreaking about it, because now there's a system, there's a housing that anything can be put into, and that individual that can be customized in whatever language, whatever symbol sets, whatever has been chosen can be put into it. And that had never been done before. I'm not sure why it had never been done before, but we did it. And we're so proud of it. And we're so excited with all the people that we've collaborated with and that we continue to meet around just how powerful that is, because it's super empowering.
Yeah. What made you decide to start that?
So iPads got invented, and who would have ever thunk it, that this amazing bit of technology would be invented that was a touchscreen. All of a sudden you didn't need a mouse. And that really fundamentally changed the world for everybody, especially in the disability space and especially in the communication space. And so I saw this potential in touchscreen technology. So my wife and myself, my wife's name is Yen, she's a clinical psychologist, and we came up with this idea for an app that was basically a communication tool, but more leaning into education, as in like choice boards and, visual schedules and emotion scales and kind of like health related stuff. And we had a real run at it in 2011, 2012, and the app was called Pixie. And it's a very, very hard space if you don't know that space. I was a teacher and she was doing her PhD, and we just decided that we just do it because like that's why not? And as it sort of declined, not in that it wasn't a fantastic thing, but to keep something like that going requires a lot of money and marketing and all this sort of stuff that we just didn't have the bandwidth or money or time for. And so we kind of just let it just slip. We've got all the assets and it still all exists. But as I got to the end of that, I started to think to myself, like, well, what happens if people don't have an iPad? Like there's a lot of people in the world who don't have an iPad and probably never will have an iPad or a tablet of any description, even a phone. And I guess that was the beginning of it. And I'm a very sort of socially just person and it's sort of, I guess, working in the field that I am, in. And it just slowly grew this idea of like, what's out there for people who don't have access to this, because that's not really fair. And there was all these great AAC apps coming out. I remember in Australia, Prolo Quota Go was this first, whoa, like this thing's amazing. Like that was the first one to really kind of hit Australia and take off. And there was children walking around with it. And it was this accepted sort of thing with speech therapists and things, or SLPs. But this niggling of well, this sort of seems unfair, And then I started to get into this space with my wife with like, it was like, well, then what happens if, even if you do have an iPad, but you're in a situation where, you can't charge your iPad or you can't take your iPad because you don't want it to get damaged or wet or something like that. And so, obviously pre-iPad, the go-to for most special schools and most parents and most therapists was laminated pieces of paper. Laminated pieces of paper are fantastic and they're quite time consuming to make and all this sort of stuff. And so things just started to sort of click into place. It's kind of like, okay, like we've got this. And it just got to a point where we started to sketch out designs, and my wife's a very clever person and I've got a reasonable brain, and we just sort of came up with this idea, and it evolved, and we did prototypes and things really sucked, and we changed things and we put it to people, and we had, I've got a collection upstairs of all these different prototypes that we made, all self-funded, all just grinding away at night and just mucking around with things. And it kind of tipped over into a space, I guess. There's a lot of discussion around the term tipping point. I guess the tipping point was like, well, if we've come up with this idea or this concept, it was an idea, but it was more kind of like conceptual in like what it could do for people. And it was almost like we couldn't turn back and let it go. And there was like this weird obligation that we needed to somehow keep this going and see where it landed. And what we realized was that it was going to be a very, very powerful tool, not only for a place like Australia, but, I started to connect with people in Cambodia to start off with and all these different places where there was no option to have high tech. And we always had this idea of this, like that a mother could sit down at night in sort of substandard housing with no electricity, buy a candle with a pencil and a piece of paper and be able to sketch out a communication system that their child could use. If that was possible, then really anything was possible, because that was, I guess, fulfilling a human right, not only the human right of the child who was going to be using it. And I do apologise for only kind of focusing on children. When I say children, I mean anyone with a complex communication need, but I guess my whole life and brain is around children's needs. But we just kind of thought, it needs to be something that can be easily used, because there is all this talk of, barriers to this and barriers to that. And it's just like, well, how do we just completely remove the barriers? And all they need to do is be able to have access to this thing, and they can, jumping back to what I was saying about human rights, like it's the human right of the child who's going to be using it, but it's also the right of the parent to be in a position to be able to create something for their child to communicate with. Mm-hmm. And that became a very important driver as well. Not just like what is the rights of the child. Of course, the child has a right to be able to express themselves, but the empowering nature and the capacity building nature of a parent or a community or a family or being able to shape that communication system, that became, it's just like, hell yeah, they need a right to that. Like that's a really important access to a tool that they don't have access to at the moment. Because what's the option? They're going to print and laminate something, how? Where are those resources coming from? Who's laminating for them? Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of, and that gets into another whole discussion that, interestingly, Molly brought up the other night. It's kind of like, well, there needs to be an easy way to do it. The lamination thing is quite a cumbersome, expensive, and time-consuming, resource-hungry.
And there's an impact on the environment too. She was saying about the plastic.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely, a huge impact.
What's your mission and vision with PicSeePal?
The mission is just to try and get as many individuals communicating as possible, because there is a lot of people out there who don't have any knowledge or understanding of what is possible with access to robust communication systems, whether or not that's an individual with autism or any other type of disability. Because let's be honest, most disabilities come with some type of communication complex need. So we want to make sure that anyone who does have a complex communication need has an option through our device. And so that has been the mission from the beginning. I guess the vision is that, what is possible, because when, getting back to the discussion around self-induced behavior and things like that, like the vision is that a world where individuals who do have complex communication needs can communicate more effectively or to the best of their potential. It's going to be a better world for those people, not just for those people, but for those people's families and for those people's communities. And I guess on a macro level of what the Global Autism Project is doing is that it's going to allow those people to have more engagement in their communities and be more present and be more able to contribute and share their own experiences. Not unlike what this podcast is, it's giving people a voice. It's providing a conduit to the way they're thinking and the way they're feeling and what their experience is. I think that that's the only way to have inclusion and to have acceptance. It's to give the people who we're talking about that should be included or should have acceptance, giving them a voice is very important. And I think that when you're non-speaking or non-verbal, you don't have a voice. My partner in the States, Brandy Wentland, who's an amazing SLP who's done some just fantastic things, and PicSeePal wouldn't be where it was without her. She has a company called We Speak AAC, and many of her, amazing friends and colleagues that work with her are AAC users, and their voice is so important, in these conversations.
Yeah.
So yeah, PicSeePal is about inclusion and how to include through providing, communication and giving people a voice.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. Would you like to learn more about augmentative alternative communication? Follow the link in the show notes for the full conversation with Chris, and be sure to subscribe for more stories from people connected to autism, inspiring change and building community. Let's work together to transform how the world relates to autism. Thanks for listening. Take care.